Welcome to Our Jewish Roots. Faith unshakable, faith unstoppable, faith of our fathers.
I'd like to put a rhetorical question to you. Rhetorical question is said for effect. Of course, you can't really answer me, but you can answer it for yourself if you can. And the question is, how can you, how can I, how can we claim to know anything about the faith of our fathers? By that I mean, it's sufficient for us to know what resides in our own hearts and minds. Never mind lay siege to the claim to know somebody else's. Never mind individuals that are centuries removed in the sense of our fathers of our culture, or millennia removed in the case of biblical personalities. Do you know how come we can know it? Because they wrote. They wrote on scrolls. Now, I don't want to carry 66 of these around. I'm glad I have this. And this gives you a window into the hearts and minds of the authors. As it says, the long arm of the pen reaches beyond the grave. Because they write, we can get a window into their world. At the end of the day, we want to be able to get into biblical literature to learn about biblical fathers, our nation's founders, and you know what? We can learn a few things about how we can take on the struggles of the day, because the truth of the matter is we all have to tackle the giants. I think of the tyrants that were raising their hoary heads when our founders declared their independence. They drew a line in the sand and said enough already. And they were the better for it because they did it. It wasn't easy, and we know it wasn't easy. We read their writings, and we read the prayers. We read how hearts and minds were taken to the Bible.
It seems appropriate, because I've brought with me today some thoughts from an extraordinary scientist you know well, Mr. Benjamin Franklin.
I so admire him, a statesman and a wonderful author as well.
He, like many others who've just signed our Declaration of Independence, has placed great importance on Almighty God. He was selected to be part of the committee to draft an official seal for our nation, and Mr. Franklin proposed Moses lifting up his wand and dividing the Red Sea, and Pharaoh in his chariot overwhelmed with the waters, accompanied by the motto, "Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God."
So many of our founding fathers are unknown. Benjamin Franklin is better known. He had faith in God, did he not?
He had faith in God. It's interesting that today he's often called a deist. And in his autobiography, which he writes his own autobiography, and he talked about how that young in life he was really enthralled with deism. And within a page he says, but I quickly rejected it, finding it not being useful, and he really kind of talks about how crazy it is. So what people do is they take that quote where he was a deist early in life and ignore the next page where he says, but I quickly rejected that. And so when you look at Franklin, I think it's safe to say he's one of the least religious founding fathers, but least is a comparative term. I mean, are we talking?
So many were ministers.
That's right. I mean, if you have 100 preachers in a room, one's going to be the least religious.
That's true.
And so
it's hard to compete with all these Bible scholars.
And that's exactly it. So even when you look at him as the least religious founding father, I mean, what he did behaviorally was so significant. And maybe one of the strongest things I'd point to where he had such a dramatic impact on America was in the middle of the Constitutional Convention. He started calling for the Constitutional Convention way back in the 1740s and 50s, so 30 years before it happened. And when it does happen, this is what he's been dreaming of. He's the first guy to call for the United States of America, is Ben Franklin. So when it happens, for the first 5 weeks, it's nothing but fighting and bickering, because every state came with their own agenda. You had the New York plan and the Connecticut plan and the Virginia plan. And after 5 weeks, they're leaving and going home in disgust. Alexander Hamilton's going out of there. George Mason's leaving. They're tired of it. That's when Franklin calls them to prayer, reminds them that God is the one who helped us win the revolution. We've gone through the Constitutional Convention without praying. We need to get to prayer. James Madison records it in Madison's own writings. And in that call to prayer, in about 14 sentences, Ben Franklin quotes 14 different Bible verses to call these guys to prayer. The result is they take 3 days off the convention. This is a newspaper from the 3 days that the convention was off. And right here across the left side, you see that the Constitutional Convention went to church together, and while they were there, the Reverend William Rogers prayed over the Constitutional Convention. His prayer was so significant it made the front page of the newspapers back in the day. When they reassembled after this time of prayer, Franklin and others talk about how the tone changed. They were suddenly cooperating. They suddenly started getting along. They came up with ideas they liked, and 10 weeks later, we come out with a Constitution that is the most successful in the history of the world. But it almost didn't happen, and I think it probably would not have happened had not Franklin called them to remember God and get God back in it.